explain to me why there has been, why this, I mean, the coverage of this new superseding indictment has been, these are really damning new charges. For some people, they're going to be like, oh, this is count 72, 73, 74. What makes this? Why are some people saying, whoa, this is a big deal?
I think that the superseding indictment blows out of the water one of the primary defense that we've heard from the former president, which is, I had the complete authority to take these documents. It was my right to take these documents. If you truly believe that you had the authority to take them, then why are you attempting to delete the security footage that shows you moving them around? And that prosecutors were going to use that to try to tell a story to the jury about a consciousness of guilt, about the idea that he knew this was wrong, and this is part of the cover-up story.
So why do we think, I mean, is it as obvious as it looks that Jack Smith just got another cooperating witness, was able to get enough evidence to put this in an indictment since the last one? Is that basically what it's what it looks like? Is that what we should?
It's certainly one of the things we're trying to report out right now is what in the world is going on with Cevallos. We have confirmed that that's employee 4. We have confirmed that once upon a time he was represented by Stan Woodward, who also represents other witnesses in this case.
So suddenly he is no longer, like Cassidy Hutchinson, we saw this.
Exactly.
When she changed attorneys, right? The minute we see an attorney change, you're suddenly gone, oh.
It's at least something to raise questions about. And something we're trying to pin down is exactly who is this man's lawyer, because it appears his status is a little bit different now.
So, Danny, it sounds like Trump's defense is going to be, but I didn't alter the security footage.
His defense is basically going to remain the same, and it's limited. It's always been limited. It was limited 2 months ago when the original indictment came out. It's really going to be limited to some variation of, I don't know anything, or these are my minions and they did things I have no control over. That's really about it. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that that's the optimal defense. I don't mean that that's an ideal situation. Defense attorneys take the facts as they're given to them, and we have to come up with something based on those facts. Prosecutors pick the facts. We have to come up with a defense that, as long as the judge lets us get it in, we got to try it.
Well, let me ask you this. So here, the boss exchange, right, which is, you know, Trump. So here's, apparently, according to the superseding indictment, De Oliveira told Trump employee 4, we believe this is the IT guy, that the boss, referring to Donald Trump, wanted the server deleted. Trump employee 4 responded that he would not know how to do that and that he did not believe that he would have the right to do that. Trump employee 4 told De Oliveira that De Oliveira would have to reach out to another employee who was a supervisor of security for Trump's business organization. De Oliveira then insisted to Trump employee 4 that the boss wanted the server deleted and asked, what are we going to do? Is that enough to basically tie it to Trump? I mean, how do you prove that? It's pretty circumstantial, is it not?
Now, there's a lot going on there. When you think about these two co-defendants, De Oliveira and Nauta, this is
but the employee 4 is not the co-defendant here.
Exactly right. And employee 4, you can reasonably infer that everybody who's named anonymously, those are people that provided information. And we can expect they will march in at trial and give testimony. And the other thing to consider, too, is that narrative you just described. For Trump to have a defense, if it's not true that the boss gave these orders, that means he has to turn on Nauta. It means he has to turn on De Oliveira. So while we say today, those folks may be saying to their lawyers, I am standing firm with the boss. I love him. He's my guy.
Trump could throw him under the water.
Trump's defense almost necessarily will be, these guys are liars. They did this of their own accord. Again, he's got limited options. This appears to be what is remaining in a closing window.
There is not a chance that that exchange is all that Jack Smith has, and then he indicted the former president of the United States. You can't have some hearsay.
You think this is the minimal he had to put into the indictment?
Exactly.
But not the maximum.
I would be shocked if that's all he has, because it's hearsay.
Because this wouldn't be enough, would it?
No.
On its own?
I think that on its own, I think that's a hard case to make. I think he must have something else to bolster it, and he doesn't have to show his cards right now.
Let's talk about scheduling this trial. So now there's a superseding indictment.
I've been beating this drum for months.
Because I assume this now makes it easier to delay this thing.
Of course. I said at the day the indictment came out, look, I have to take the government to task on one thing. They originally wanted this case to go to trial December 11th. I said, not a chance. Then the judge set May 24th, and I said, not a chance. If you asked me for my reasons, I couldn't give them to you, but I know that things happen, unexpected things. Chuck, we're 2 months out from the original indictment. It took a month for one of the co-defendants to get arraigned. Now, 2 months out, we already have a superseding indictment with a new defendant and new allegations, new counts, all kinds of new things, something nobody foresaw.
Right.
Yesterday, we were all sitting around waiting for an indictment hundreds of miles away in D.C., so none of us anticipated this. This is a reason to push it out. The government will argue they can still go to trial in May.
Yeah.
The defense has a very fair argument to push it up. And so here's why I take them to task very briefly is that the government, in arguing for a December date, must have known on some level they had some thread and some possibility that there might be a superseding indictment. They were the only people who knew that. Yeah. So for them to argue for a December trial date seems a little strange now. But I get it. They want to rush to trial. The defense doesn't.
What if they're okay with it slipping? What if they're okay with it slipping because they want to bolster the case and they'd rather do it the right way? And if they're going to charge him in another jurisdiction that might move a little faster, what does it matter if the date slips?
This is where it can get complicated. In the purest form, if I were at justice, I would not want the presidential campaign to be hovering over the trial.
Yeah.
I'd want it after. Now, if he wins, everything changes.
If he wins, the whole case goes away. If he wins, he fires the attorney general. He gets to pick his own attorney general. He fires Jack Smith to the extent Jack Smith isn't around.
Is there going to be a single
Doesn't have to go
trial, New York, Atlanta, Washington, or Florida, that will happen before November of 2024?
New York might.
How would that take?
New
how would
York
that
might.
happen?
The discovery is a little bit more limited. It's not about classified documents, about hush money payments and falsifying business records. Doesn't mean he's not going to try to delay it, but I think that of all the cases, that's ironically the one that might actually happen before the election.
So the case that sort of
on the periphery, not about undoing democracy. Yes.
Right, and the other three, obviously much more serious. Do we assume, Danny, that Fani Willis and Jack Smith are coordinating?
Coordinating.
To a point.
But I often wonder if there might even be a subtle bit of competition here. They're very conscious of who's going to indict who for what first.
What competition? The feds always win.
They always win. By the way, that's something that people aren't talking about enough, which is that your odds are always a lot better in state court. I don't care if it's Fulton County. I've never had a case in Fulton County, but I can just tell you the odds are always better in state court, especially in a big county, high population county. Those are usually the easier places to win. You virtually, and I'm saying this as somebody who's in federal court, I don't prefer to be in federal court. Federal court's a depressing place to be for a criminal defendant because they virtually almost always lose.
Is it surprising to them not to get a heads up on a superseding indictment or not?
Defense attorneys?
Yeah.
No, but it does speak to sort of what I think will probably be strained relations from here on out.
Because they dropped this. They clearly met on the other case. Yeah. And we have every indication.
They could have given a professional heads up. But how many times have you had a prosecutor?
We do have something coming today.
So many times.
It's not with this case, just FYI.
Exactly. And that would be a professional courtesy that you can imagine that's extended. And it's sort of the reason why you want a good criminal defense attorney who has a relationship as a former federal prosecutor have that kind of conversation. We don't have any evidence that happened.
There's a new lawyer every week that he brings onto the team that needs time to ramp up, which I assume is another way for them to continue to try to buy time.
Yes, and this is a client that will eventually lead to strained relations because this is a client that gives orders. Go tell them that I said this, that, or the other. And that necessarily, even if these attorneys, and some of them are really experienced federal criminal defense attorneys, really, really accomplished folks, but that gives them their marching orders. That makes it very tough to have a good relationship with the government. And by the way, the government can be tough to deal with. Sometimes they're reasonable, sometimes not.
One of his former lawyers, in this case it was Ty Cobb, who was part of one of the early impeachments when he was president. Or the Mueller. He was during the Mueller probe. Apologies there. He describes the classified document case as beyond open and shut. As a defense attorney, would you be telling your client that?
I don't know which open and shut he said, but I would be. The classified documents case is going to be a really difficult case to win. This latest superseding indictment
for Trump.
For Trump. Yeah. Yes, of course, the government has the burden, but the government almost always meets that burden. Keep in mind, the reason they're so good is that they've investigated this case for a long, long time, and they didn't indict unless and until, going back to what Laura said, they did not tell us everything they have in this indictment. They don't have to. They don't want to. They're not going to show all their cards. And you have to believe that if they are going to take on the most difficult criminal defendant in American criminal history, that they are going to have everything lined up. They're going to be loaded for bear.
I'm curious, how do we think justice received the Trump attorney's threats or warnings that a January 6th indictment, Laura, could tear this country apart? It's almost like, I hate to say, it almost feels like an old mob boss saying, it's a mighty fine democracy you have there.
I think that you say that
If you'd like to keep it.
I think that you say that given who the client is and his past history of inflammatory remarks. But I think, like, objectively, that's not actually a crazy thing to say. If your argument is institutionally, this could have ramifications, and maybe it's up to the voters to decide whether he's fit for office, I can understand that argument in theory. Given, though, who the client is and what he has said and what he has arguably inspired, obviously different story.
Have you ever seen a federal prosecutor go, well, we should bring charges, but maybe we ought to hold on?
No, but I have had a client in a situation where they reduced the charges to lesser offenses. So there are times where you might see something get reduced. Does it go away completely because you go in and make your case? No.
If Donald Trump cooperated at all, they would have.
This case would not exist.
They would love to cut a deal if he would admit something, right?
This would be a plea deal.
If he would admit something, they'd cut a deal tomorrow.
Yes, and this is somebody who would never, ever enter into a plea agreement. So they know from the beginning this case is always going to go to trial. Sometimes you have a client that will never even look at a plea agreement, and that's the way it is.
Well, I think he believes the only way he wins this case is at the ballot box in November. And it certainly looks like.
And that would be a win in the federal cases.
It certainly looks like that seems to be the only strategy legally that they have. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.